In the winter of 1899, a 37-ton locomotive dangled over a 400-foot abyss, taller than the Statue of Liberty, and held only by a single steam cable and 6 men who had already lost fingers to frostbite. This is the mile of track that 8 horses, froze dynamite, and paid in gold or limbs. Engineers called it the deadliest mile on Earth. The gold rush did not need the railway. It needed a miracle. Tonight, you will see how they blasted a shelf barely wide enough for 2 rails, why frozen rock explodes backward, and the one mistake that dropped locomotives like stones. If you miss the ending, you will never know why the nickel still matters, a coin-width tolerance that kept trains from plunging into the void, measured by men who had no margin for error. This is not nostalgia. It is a blueprint of desperation. 4 engineering gambles, each deadlier than the last, that turned a 110-mile death march into the most profitable railroad per mile ever built. The logbooks burned. The foreman died nameless. But the engineering survives, and so do the scars. The techniques are exact. The physics is verified. Why? Gold, yes, but also desperation. Seattle was drowning in the panic of 1893 bankruptcies. Skagway was a tent city ruled by conman Soapy Smith. These were not engineers. They were the broke, the desperate, the men with no other winter. The railroad was a death sentence they signed for $3 a day. The alternative was worse. Haul your fortune over Chilkoot Pass on your back, through waist-deep snow, where a misstep meant you and your gold disappeared into a crevasse no one would ever find. So they built the railroad, and the mountain made them pay for every inch. January 3rd, milepost 17. The thermometers at White Pass bottom out at 42 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Cold so deep, the steel drill bits sound like wine glasses when they strike rock. But strike they must, because the cliff above Skagway is crystallized into a loaded spring. Hit it wrong, and it explodes outward, taking the crew with it. The fix is barbaric. A 20-gallon kettle hauled up the incline, water still scalding from the mess tent. They flood the shot holes for 3 seconds, raising the surface exactly 7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just enough for the granite to accept the drill without shattering. 1 kettle, 1 minute, 1 inch of progress. The cost is arithmetic. Every spilled drop flash freezes to skin. Pull away too slow, and the hand becomes part of the rock. By one foreman's rough count, let us call him Bill McKenzie, a stand-in for the dozen nameless bosses who kept the tallies. 42 fingers and hands were gone before February, logged in margins if logged at all. In one surviving note, he writes, "Still cheaper than losing the day. They blast the thawed shot holes at dusk, praying the nitroglycerin has not turned to crystals in the cold. 1 frozen crystal, and the whole shelf disappears. The mountain answers with a cough of black powder, and the grade crawls forward another 8 feet. 8 feet, 2 fingers, 1 life. Multiply by 100. That is how you carve a railroad out of ice. Thawed rock means nothing if you can't feed it explosives. And the only way up the pass? On the back of a walking fuse." February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1898. The trail is a gutter of frozen blood. 3,000 horses dead in 6 months. Carcasses stacked 12 feet high along the cliff edge. Engineers reroute the grade through the graveyard, dynamite the horse ice layers to widen the bench. The living animals balk at the smell. The dead ones burn as traction under the sleds. Nitroglycerin. Wagons are banned after the first slide sends a ton of liquid fire into the canyon. Instead, the tins ride on the animals. 4 tins per mule, 2 sides. 20 pounds of hell each. One slip, one hoof through ice, and the beast becomes a shrapnel bouquet. One crew, maybe 8 mules, maybe 20, vanishes in a single heartbeat. The blast wave strips the opposite slope bare of timber. Splinters rain a quarter-mile downstream. Surveyors later find a tin lid embedded in a frozen corpse 80 feet above the trail. The company doesn't count animals, it budgets for them. So far, we've seen the price of drilling and the madness of delivery. Now comes the secret that made it possible: teaching frozen dynamite to behave. February 1898, milepost 44. A disused prospect drift becomes the railroad's off-books laboratory. The chief powderman, we'll call him Frank Hannon, though his real name, like most, is lost, orders 200 sticks of straight nitroglycerin gel packed in tin cigar tubes. He is ex-naval ordnance, missing 3 toes from frostbite, and his goal is this: detonate at -40 and measure if the blast behaves. Here is the problem. Warm dynamite rips granite outward at 3,120 feet per second. Frozen dynamite travels at 2,750 feet per second. That difference of 370 feet decides whether you carve rock or the rock peels your face into the canyon. To hit that number on command, Hannon floods the tunnel floor with Skagway Bay water, then vents the noon wind. In 3 hours, the drift becomes a natural freezer. The walls glitter with ice needles that grow a quarter inch every 10 minutes. The unwritten rule is 47 minutes in the freeze. Any longer, and the nitro begins to sweat crystals no bigger than salt grains. Those crystals are touch sensitive. A dropped caliper once blew a man's forearm into the rafters. Hannon's fix is brutal. He pre-warms the fuse. He keeps the blasting caps inside his wool shirt next to his skin, rotating them every 60 seconds so perspiration does not rust the copper. When the cap meets the frozen stick, the temperature equalizes in 4 heartbeats. Any faster, thermal shock cracks the gel, and the tunnel becomes a crater. The first test is at 11 p.m., with 14 witnesses. The charge is tamped with powdered horse manure, dry to insulate, and it adds nitrogen. The fuse hisses blue during a 90-second burn. At -40, the flame sounds different, a higher pitch, like tearing silk. Result: perfect shear. The granite breaks inward, leaving a lip only 2 inches wider than the drill pattern, which is inside tolerance. Hannon pencils a single word in the log: acceptable. Phase 2 is a 50-pound garden of 38 sticks wired in parallel, enough to carve a 12-foot bench, the exact cut needed at mile 72. They freeze the bundle overnight, then lower it into the face using a rawhide sling because leather does not spark. Detonation clocks in around 2,780 feet per second, close enough to the calculated target. Translation: frozen dynamite works, but you get one shot. Miss the fuse window and the mountain repays you with a 200-ton slab riding a cushion of air. Hannon's log, if it ever existed, is lost, but the physics checks out. Freeze nitro to -40, and the velocity drops to the calculated range. The math survives, even if the men did not. Every powder crew now carries a pocket watch and a mouth thermometer. If your spit freezes, you wait. The rule saves an estimated 14 lives before spring breakup and becomes the hidden reason the rails reach the cliff edge on schedule. With frozen explosives tamed, the real nightmare begins, lowering 31 tons of iron into the wind itself. Milepost 72, May 1899. The surveyors reach a fin of rock with no top and no bottom. just 400 feet of air on one side and a glacier on the other. The only way to plant the final rails is to suspend a locomotive over the void like a pendulum and drill beneath its wheels. Void. They rig a Philadelphia steam hoist, 2 boilers lashed to pine, dead men driven 20 feet into permafrost, test load, an empty flat car. It drops 6 inches, the ropes scream, then hold. The foreman marks the sag in red chalk. Acceptable. The locomotive, let's call her number 7, is a 280 built in 1898, stripped to 31 tons. Tank dry, cab unbolted, crew of 3 volunteers. They ride her down like an elevator with no walls, spinning slowly on the hemp. One man keeps drilling, ankles wrapped around the rail for purchase, while updrafts frost his eyelashes shut. Number 7. At 150 feet, the main rope begins to fiber. 1 strand snaps, then 2. The signal whistle jams open, a shrill scream that echoes off the ice field. On the cliff top, 10 men throw their weight onto the brake beam. The spool stops with 1 inch of rope left on the drum. Whistle. They finish the last bolt hole, drive the rail spike, and winch the engine back up, slowly, 1 tooth at a time. Winch total progress, 42 feet of track. Cost, 1 rope, 3 pairs of underwear, and the hearing in the left ear of every man on the brake. The railroad calls it Tuesday. Cost. After her recovery, number 7 ran freight and passengers through 2 world wars, surviving until 1954 as the last steam engine in regular service on the line. Today, she stands fully restored in the McBride Museum of Yukon History, Whitehorse, where children ring her bell and climb her cab. The engine that danced over the abyss outlived every man who lowered her. Outlived. But hanging an engine is pointless if the rails don't line up, and measuring to a coin's width when the mountain is breathing, that's the final trick. Come breakup season, the cliff expands like a lung. Ice wedges open hairline fractures. The railhead can drift sideways a full ½ inch, enough to derail a locomotive crawling along the lip. The company's insurance underwriter demands a tolerance of 1 nickel's width, 1.95 millimeters, or the line shuts down. Solution: the midnight gauge crew. 3 men, every night at 2 in the morning, when the iron contracts to its shortest length. They measure every joint with a sterling silver caliper, ground to a knife edge. If the gap grows thicker than a 1901 Liberty Head nickel, they drive a tapered maple wedge soaked in hot fish oil. The wedge expands as it cools, and it locks the rail back true. Maple wedges cost 4 cents each, last 1 season, and save the railroad $40,000 in realignment crews. The method holds until the 1960s, when laser aligners replace it. But legend says maintenance crews still carry a Liberty nickel in their toolbox, not to measure, but to remember. Because the mountain never stopped breathing, and the men never stopped counting. 4 gambles: boil the rock, arm the mule, tame the freeze, hang the engine. Together, they built a railroad that paid back its investors in 24 months and still runs a profit every summer, because the alternative was a 400-foot drop and a date with the glacier. White Pass and Yukon Route still operates today, carrying tourists through the same cuts, over the same abysses, past the same frozen horse graves that the desperate men of 1898 carved with boiling water and frozen dynamite. Next time you ride that line, remember, every inch of track cost blood, and every bolt was measured to a nickel's width. Because when you're building a railroad over hell, precision isn't a luxury, it's survival. The only thing between you and the abyss is the ghost of a locomotive that once danced on a single rope and came back to tell the tale.